The desert sun burned away the last of the morning haze, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the hard-packed earth of Helmand Province. Inside the rumbling MR app, the air was thick and stale, a mixture of dust, sweat, and diesel fumes. Corporal Eva Rostova, docked to the Marines she was embedded with, shifted her weight, the bulky body armor digging into her shoulders. Her fingers, never still, traced the worn latch of her aid bag for what felt like the 100th time that hour. It was a ritual, a tactile prayer. Inside was more than just gauze and tourniquets. It was the thin, fragile line between life and the long, dark silence that waited in this unforgiving land. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, scanned the passing landscape of mud-brick compounds and gnarled, leafless trees. The patrol had been quiet. Deceptively so. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a held breath, a predator's patience. It set her teeth on edge. She could feel the tension in the Marines around her, a coiled spring in the close confines of the vehicle. A young Private Miller nervously tapped his rifle stock with his thumb. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap was the only sound besides the grinding of the engine. Eva's thoughts drifted, a dangerous indulgence in a place that demanded constant presence. She pictured her mother's kitchen in Chicago, the smell of coffee and baking bread, the safe, solid warmth of a world away from this dust-choked tension. Her mother's face, lined with a worry that had become a permanent fixture since Eva's brother, Michael, had shipped out to a place not so different from this one. Michael, who had written letters filled with such pride for his little sister, the future corpsman. Michael, who never came home. His dog tags, cool against her skin beneath her uniform, were a weight she carried every day. They were her reason, her anchor, her reminder of why she had to be here, why she had to be good, why she could not fail. She was here for the brothers he left behind, to make sure other mothers' sons had a chance to see their kitchens again. The vehicle hit a pothole, jolting her back to the present. The sergeant up front, a grizzled veteran named Davis, keyed his mic, his voice a low growl. "Eyes sharp, people. This is the Devil's Alley. Stay frosty." The name sent a fresh chill down Eva's spine. She knew the stories, ambushes, IEDs, a place where the enemy owned the shadows. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her knuckles white. The two-way chatter on the radio was minimal, professional. They were deep in the belly of the beast now. The streets narrowed, the buildings crowding in on them, their windows dark and empty like the eye sockets of a skull. Then, the world ended. There was no warning, only a deafening, concussive crump that slammed into the lead vehicle. The force of the RPG strike was a physical blow, shaking their own MRAP violently. A cloud of dirt and shrapnel bloomed into the air, followed by the sudden terrifying rattle of automatic weapons fire. It came from everywhere at once. The rooftops, the alleys, the windows. Contact left! Contact right! The calm was shattered, replaced by a storm of controlled chaos. Marines poured out of the vehicles, seeking cover, returning fire. The sharp crack of their rifles was answered by the heavier chattering fire of the insurgents' weapons. Eva was moving on instinct, her training taking over. She dropped to the ground, the hard earth scraping her knees, and scanned for casualties. That's when she heard it. The call. It cut through the noise, sharp and desperate, a sound that bypassed the brain and went straight to the soul. "Corpsman, up!" Her head snapped around. It was Private Miller's position. He was down, crumpled behind the scant cover of a broken wall. Without a thought for the rounds snapping past her, kicking up plumes of dust at her feet, Eva was in motion. She low-crawled, her body pressed flat against the earth, dragging her aid bag behind her. The world narrowed to the few meters of deadly ground between her and the wounded Marine. A bullet whined off a rock inches from her face, spraying her with grit. She didn't flinch. She didn't stop. Her brother's face flashed in her mind. Not today. Not another one. She reached Miller. His face was pale, beaded with sweat. His leg was a mess of blood and torn fabric. "Hey, Doc," he gasped, his eyes wide with pain and fear. "Look at me, Miller. Just look at me," Eva said, her voice astonishingly calm, a steady anchor in his unraveling world. "You're gonna be fine. You hear me? You're gonna be fine." Her hands were already working, pulling a tourniquet from her kit. The firefight raged around them, a symphony of violence. But in that small, bloody patch of dirt, there was only the patient, the doc, and the unwavering will to cheat death for one more day. Her hands moved with a practiced, desperate speed. The tourniquet was a simple, brutal device, a strap of nylon and a windlass rod. She looped it high on Miller's thigh, her fingers slick with his blood, and cranked it tight. He cried out, a sharp, guttural sound lost in the gunfire. I know, just hold on," she murmured, her voice a low, steady mantra against the chaos. The flow of blood slowed to a trickle. She ripped open a combat gauze packet, stuffing the hemostatic dressing deep into the worst of the wounds. His eyes were locked on hers, wide with a terror she knew all too well. It was the look of a man staring into the abyss. "We need to move him, now!" Sergeant Davis's voice boomed as he slid into cover beside them, his rifle barking short, controlled bursts toward a nearby window. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, dust, and the coppery tang of blood. "That building, go!" He pointed to a half-collapsed mud brick structure about 15 meters away. It was a lifetime across that open, bullet-swept ground. Eva nodded, grabbing Miller by his body armor harness. Another Marine, Lopez, grabbed the other side. "On 3. 1, 2, 3!" They hauled him up, his weight a dead, awkward burden between them. They stumbled forward, legs driving, boots scrambling for purchase in the loose dirt. Eva's world narrowed to the pounding of her heart in her ears and the groaning weight of the Marine between them. A round smacked into the wall just ahead, spraying them with chunks of dried mud. They lunged the final few feet, collapsing through the low doorway into the dim, dusty interior of the compound. They laid Miller down as gently as the circumstances allowed. The room was small, shadowy, with only a single window looking out onto the killing zone. Lopez immediately took a position there, adding his rifle to the fight outside. "How is he, Doc? Stable?" "For now," Eva said, already working to get an IV line started. Her fingers trembled slightly, a fine vibration of adrenaline and fear, but her movements remained sure. She found a vein, taped the line down, and squeezed the fluid bag. "Hang in there, Miller. You're doing great. Just hang in there." She allowed herself a single deep breath, the dust in the air coating her throat. This was the fight. Not with a rifle, but with bandages and plasma and a stubborn refusal to yield. This was the battle her brother had believed in. She was so focused on her patient, on the rhythmic squeeze of the IV bag, that she didn't hear the soft scuff of a boot behind her. The shadow that fell over them was her only warning. Lopez was facing the wrong way, his attention consumed by the threat outside the window. Eva turned her head and saw him. An insurgent, his face wrapped in a scarf, his eyes burning with a feral intensity. He held a long, curved knife, its blade already dark with something that wasn't dirt. He wasn't looking at Lopez. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the helpless, wounded Marine on the floor. Time seemed to slow, stretching into a single, crystalline moment of utter clarity. There was no time to shout a warning. No time to reach for her sidearm. There was only the stark, simple choice. The knife was already descending, a swift, brutal arc aimed at Miller's exposed throat. Eva moved without thought. She threw her body across Miller's, becoming a human shield. She felt the impact before she registered the pain, a searing, white-hot punch deep in the muscle of her shoulder. The air left her lungs in a shocked gasp. She could smell the man, the scent of stale sweat and dirt. His eyes, wide with surprise and rage, were inches from hers. He pulled the blade free. She grunted, her hands scrambling, not to fight him, but to keep her body positioned over Miller's. The second stab was a cold slice across her ribs. The third was another deep, punishing thrust into her side. A strange, detached part of her mind began to count, a morbid inventory of the violence. 4, 5. Each one was a burst of fire, a violation of flesh and sinew. Her vision started to tunnel, the edges going dark. She could feel the warm spread of her own blood soaking through her uniform, mingling with Miller's on the floor. 6. Her grip on consciousness was slipping. She could hear Lopez yelling, the deafening report of his rifle firing inside the confined space. But she held on, her body a final fragile barricade. The seventh and final thrust was the deepest of all, a cold, final certainty plunging into her abdomen. A strange sense of peace washed over her, a silence that was louder than the gunfire. The last thing she saw was Miller's face, safe and untouched, beneath her. The last thing she felt was not pain, but a profound, unshakable satisfaction. She had kept her promise. Not another one. The sound was not a single gunshot, but a storm contained within four walls. It was a brutal, deafening roar that slammed into Eva's fading consciousness. Lopez, his face a mask of pure fury, had spun from the window and emptied half his magazine into the insurgent at point-blank range. The man with the knife was thrown back, his body slumping against the wall before sliding to the floor, leaving a dark, wet smear on the mud brick. Silence rushed back into the room, thick and heavy, broken only by Lopez's ragged breathing and the relentless, muffled firefight outside. "Doc, Doc!" Lopez was at her side, his hands frantic, pressing against the wounds in her side and back. The pressure sent fresh waves of agony through her, pulling her back from the edge of the abyss. Her vision swam, blurring Lopez's terrified face above her.
Miller."
The words were a bloody whisper, a bubble of air and effort. "He's okay, Doc. He's okay. You saved him. Just stay with me, you hear? Stay with me!" Lopez's voice was cracking. He ripped open a fresh combat dressing from her own aid bag, the one she had used to save others, and pressed it hard against the worst of the wounds in her abdomen. The white gauze turned crimson instantly. Eva's world became a narrow tunnel of pain and sound. She could hear Sergeant Davis on the radio, his voice strained but controlled, calling for an immediate medevac. "We have a corpsman down. Catastrophic trauma. We need that bird now." The response was a crackle of static and a distant, blessed promise. 5 mics out, 5 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Lopez kept talking to her, his voice a steady anchor. "You're the toughest doc we've ever had, Rostova. You're not going anywhere. You hear me? Your mom would kill me." A weak, almost imperceptible smile touched her bloody lips. She thought of her mother's face, the worry lines around her eyes. She thought of her brother's dog tags, still cool against her skin. She had done it. She had kept the promise she made to his memory. The distinctive, thrumming beat of helicopter rotors grew from a whisper to a thunderous roar overhead. The sound of freedom. The firefight outside intensified as the Marines laid down a suppressing blanket of fire to protect the landing zone. Shadows moved in the doorway. More Marines poured into the room, their faces grim as they saw her. "Easy, Doc. We got you." Hands, gentle but firm, lifted her onto a litter. The movement sent fresh jolts of fire through her body, and a cry escaped her lips before she could stop it. They carried her out of the dark, blood-soaked room and into the blinding Afghan sun. The world was a whirlwind of dust and noise, the downwash from the Black Hawk helicopter whipping up a stinging storm of sand. She saw the bird, its side door open, a medic inside reaching out. They loaded her in first, then Miller was carefully passed up beside her. The inside of the helicopter was a cacophony of wind, rotor noise, and urgent voices. The flight medic was already at work, cutting away her uniform, assessing the damage, starting new IV lines. He shook his head, his expression grave. "Hang on, sister. Just hang on." As the helicopter lurched into the sky, Ava turned her head. Through the open door, she saw the village falling away below, the tiny figures of the Marines still fighting. She saw Lopez looking up at the departing bird, offering a sharp, solemn salute. Then her eyes found Miller on the litter next to her. He was conscious, his head turned toward her. His lips moved, forming 2 silent words. "Thank you." That was all that mattered. The pain began to recede, not because it was gone, but because a deep, profound cold was spreading through her limbs. The medic's voice became distant, an echo in a long tunnel. The world faded to a pinprick of light, and then, as the helicopter raced toward the field hospital, everything went quiet. The last of her strength was gone, and she surrendered to the silence. The image of a safe Marine burned into her dying mind. The first sensation was a distant, rhythmic beeping. It was a clean, electronic sound, a world away from the crunch of explosions and the rattle of gunfire. Then came the smell, Not dust or blood or cordite, but the sterile, antiseptic scent of a hospital. Eva Rostova drifted toward it, swimming up through layers of thick, dark water toward that single, steady sound. Pain was there, waiting for her. A deep, throbbing agony that seemed to radiate from her entire core, a constellation of fire across her shoulder, her ribs, her abdomen. She tried to open her eyes, but the light was a sharp white blade. A soft groan escaped her lips. A cool hand touched her forehead. Corporal Rostova? Eva, can you hear me? You're safe. You're at the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Germany. The word meant nothing and everything. It was a waypoint, a place between the war and home. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the glare. A nurse with a kind, tired face swam into view. Tubes ran from her arms, and a cannula fed oxygen into her nose. The beeping, she realized, was her own heart, a steady, reassuring rhythm on a monitor beside the bed. Miller? The name was a dry croak, a rasp that scraped her raw throat. Private Miller? The nurse's smile was immediate and genuine. He's fine. He's down the hall and he's going to be just fine thanks to you. She held a straw to Eva's lips, and the cool water was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. The relief that washed through her was more potent than any morphine drip. She had done it. He was alive. A doctor arrived, his demeanor calm and professional. He explained the damage in blunt clinical terms. 7 penetrating stab wounds, a collapsed lung, a lacerated liver that required significant surgical repair, significant blood loss requiring multiple transfusions. You are an incredibly lucky woman, Corporal, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. A few centimeters in any direction, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Lucky. The word felt strange. She didn't feel lucky. She felt broken, stitched back together like a torn doll. But Miller was alive. That was the only math that mattered. Later, they brought her a satellite phone. Her hands trembled as she held the heavy receiver. Dialing the number felt like an act of profound strangeness, a connection to a planet she had left behind. Her mother answered on the second ring. Mom? Eva's voice was weak, a ghost of itself. There was a sharp, choked sob on the other end of the line. Eva? Oh my God, Eva, baby, is that you? Her mother's voice was a torrent of emotion, tears and relief, and a fear that was only now beginning to subside. We got a call. They said you were injured. They wouldn't give us details, just that you were stable. I've been going out of my mind. I'm okay, Mom. I'm really okay, Eva said, the lie feeling necessary and true all at once. She was alive. That was a form of okay. She listened as her mother talked, the familiar cadence of her voice a balm on her wounded soul. She talked about the neighbors, the weather, anything and everything to fill the silence with the sound of a normal world. Eva closed her eyes, picturing the kitchen, the yellow curtains, the familiar cracks in the ceiling. It was all still there. Her mother's voice was the tether pulling her back from the edge. She hung up the phone, feeling drained, but somehow more solid. The nurse came back to check her vitals. You should get some rest. You have a long recovery ahead of you. As Eva drifted into a drug-facilitated sleep, the sterile quiet of the German hospital was a stark contrast to the memory of the dusty compound. But the memory was no longer just one of violence and pain. It was now also the memory of Lopez's desperate voice telling her to hold on, the thunder of the rescue helicopter, and the sight of Miller's grateful eyes. She had walked through the fire, and on the other side she had found not an end, but a reason to keep going. The fight was over, but the woman who emerged from it was only just beginning to understand the cost and the value of the life she had saved. The California sun was different. It was gentle, warming the skin without the hostile, baking intensity of the Hellman sun. Maria Rostova sat at her kitchen table, the morning light catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was quiet, a silence that had become a constant, aching presence since Eva had deployed. Her coffee grew cold, untouched. Her morning ritual was now just waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the news, good or bad. The official call days ago had been a nightmare of vague, terrifying language. Your daughter has been seriously injured in combat. Stable condition. Being transported to Landstuhl. The words had turned her blood to ice. Now she was trapped in this agonizing limbo, jumping at every car that passed by. Then she saw it. A dark, government-issued sedan, polished to a mirror shine, turned onto her street. It moved with a slow, deliberate purpose that made her heart stutter and freeze in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the visit. The one you saw in movies, the one every military family prayed would never come to their door. The car pulled to a smooth stop right in front of her house. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as two men emerged from the vehicle. They were Marines, not in the dusty, battle-worn camis she saw in Eva's photos, but in their impeccable dress blue uniforms. The uniforms were a spectacle of dark blue and red, each medal and ribbon perfectly aligned, each crease razor-sharp. They looked like figures from a parade, not messengers from a war zone. Their faces were solemn, etched with a gravity that confirmed her worst fears. This was a death notification. It had to be. Why else would they come like this in their finest, if not to deliver the ultimate respectful bad news? She watched them, paralyzed as they walked up her front path. Their steps were measured, precise. The taller one, a colonel, she thought distantly, carried a small black portfolio. It was too flat to be a flag. Maybe it contained the paperwork, the official notification of her daughter's death. A low moan escaped her lips. She felt the world tilt, the familiar kitchen swimming before her eyes. She saw Ava as a little girl laughing on a swing. She saw her in her Navy uniform on graduation day, so proud, so alive. The memory was a physical pain. A firm, polite knock echoed through the silent house. The sound was final, a period at the end of a sentence. Maria forced her legs to work, pushing herself up from the chair. She wiped her tears with a trembling hand, squaring her shoulders. She was a Marine's mother. She would meet this with strength. She walked to the door, each step feeling like a mile, and turned the knob. The two Marines stood at attention on her doorstep. The colonel's eyes were not cold, she realized, but held a deep, profound respect. He did not hold out a folded flag. He did not offer condolences. Mrs. Rostova? His voice was deep, calm, and carried an unexpected warmth. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. She braced herself for the blow. "Ma'am," the colonel began, his gaze steady and direct. "My name is Colonel James Mitchell. We are here today from the office of the Secretary of the Navy." He paused, letting the weight of the institution settle in the air. "We are here to inform you that your daughter, Corporal Ava Rostova, has been recommended for the United States Navy's second highest award for valor, the Navy Cross." The words did not make sense at first. They bounced off the wall of grief she had built. She stared at him, uncomprehending. "The Navy Cross? For valor?" He opened the portfolio. Inside was not paperwork, but a detailed citation and a photograph of the medal itself, a stark, beautiful cross hanging from a blue and white ribbon. "For extraordinary heroism while serving as a corpsman with a Marine Corps infantry platoon in Afghanistan," he read, his voice gaining a ceremonial cadence. Corporal Rostova, with complete disregard for her own life, interposed her body between a wounded Marine and an enemy combatant, absorbing multiple stab wounds to protect her patient. Her actions were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The truth, the magnificent, stunning truth, finally broke through. Ava wasn't dead. She was a hero. The pressure in Maria's chest shattered, not into more grief, but into a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled her knees. A sob, half relief, half overwhelming pride, burst from her. She brought her hands to her face, tears of joy now streaming freely down her cheeks. The Marines remained at attention, their solemn expressions softening into something akin to reverence. They were not there to deliver an ending. They were there to announce a legend. The auditorium on the Marine Corps base was a sea of crisp, dark blue and green. The air hummed with a low, respectful murmur, the sound of hundreds of Marines and sailors assembled in perfect, silent rows. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, glinting off brass buttons and the highly polished toes of dress shoes. The scent of floor wax and starched fabric filled the space. On the stage, a podium stood flanked by flags, the Stars and Stripes, the Navy flag, the Marine Corps standard. It was a scene of immense tradition and solemn power. Ava Rostova stood just off stage, her heart hammering a rhythm that felt louder than any drum. She wore her service dress blue uniform, the same one she had once worn for her brother's funeral. It felt different today, heavier. The weight of the dark wool, the sharp cut of the jacket, it all seemed to press down on her, a physical manifestation of the occasion. Her body, still healing, ached with a familiar throb, a constant reminder of the price etched into her skin. She flexed her fingers, feeling the pull of scar tissue along her ribs. A gentle hand touched her elbow. It was Sergeant Davis, his own uniform adorned with new ribbons, his face clean-shaven and serious. "Ready, Doc?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. She took a deep breath, the air catching slightly in her repaired lung. "Ready as I'll ever be, Sergeant," he gave a curt, approving nod. "Just remember you earned this. Every bit of it." Then they called her name. "Corporal Eva M. Rostova, United States Navy." She walked onto the stage. The silence in the auditorium became absolute, a living thing. Every eye was on her. The only sound was the soft click of her heels on the polished wood and the faint rustle of her uniform. She stopped before the podium, standing at rigid attention, and executed a perfect salute to the general who stood waiting for her. He returned the salute, his eyes holding a depth of respect she had never seen in a man of his rank. The general began to read the citation. His voice, amplified through the speakers, echoed through the vast space, detailing the events of that day in Helmand. The ambush, the wounded Marine, the enemy with the knife, her decision to become a shield. He spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her own life, above and beyond the call of duty. The words were formal, almost sterile, but they painted a picture of hell and heroism that had every person in the room holding their breath. Eva's gaze drifted from the general's face, sweeping across the front row of the audience. She saw her mother, Maria, her face radiant with tears of pride, clutching a small tissue. And then, right beside her, she saw him, Private Miller. He was standing, his posture straight, his leg fully healed. He was in his dress blues, his own chest bearing the Purple Heart she had ensured he lived to receive. His eyes were locked on hers, shining with an emotion so raw and profound it stole her breath. The general finished reading. He took the dark blue box from an aide, opened it, and lifted out the medal. The Navy Cross. It was simpler than she had imagined, a stark, beautiful cross suspended from a ribbon of blue and white. It was heavy, not just in metal, but in meaning. "For extraordinary heroism," the general said, his voice resonating with finality as he pinned the medal to her uniform just over her heart. The weight of it was real, a solid, cold anchor. The auditorium erupted in applause, a thunderous, rolling wave of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It was the respect of warriors, the highest accolade she could ever receive. But it was what happened next that truly broke her composure. As the applause began to subside, Private Miller, his movements crisp and deliberate, brought his hand up in a sharp, flawless salute. It was not a gesture given lightly. It was a Marine's ultimate sign of respect to a Navy corpsman. It was a thank you. It was a recognition of the bond forged in blood and sacrifice. It was everything. Tears, which she had fought so hard to control, finally welled in Eva's eyes. She returned his salute, her own hand trembling slightly. In that silent exchange, held in the roaring arena of their peers, the entire war, the pain, the fear, the loss, it all condensed into this single, perfect moment of understanding. She had not just saved a life. She had honored a promise, and in return, she had earned the unshakable loyalty of the Marines she was sworn to protect. The medal on her chest was for the Navy, but the salute from Miller was for her, and it meant infinitely more. The thunderous applause finally began to recede, softening into a respectful silence that once again filled the auditorium. All eyes remained fixed on Eva, standing tall under the weight of the medal and the moment. The general stepped back from the podium, gesturing for her to come forward. It was time for her to speak. A fresh wave of nerves tightened her throat. But as she looked down at the faces of the Marines she had served with, at Miller's unwavering gaze, and her mother's tear-streaked, Proud smile, the words came not from a prepared speech, but from the very core of who she was. She adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the quiet. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and steady, belying the storm of emotion inside. "This medal," she paused, her fingers lightly brushing the cool metal of the cross, "is an incredible honor, but it doesn't belong to me alone." She looked directly at Sergeant Davis, at Lopez, at the entire platoon seated together in a block of dark blue. "It belongs to every Marine who laid down suppressing fire so I could reach Miller. It belongs to the pilots who flew into a hot LZ without hesitation. It belongs to the medics who kept me alive on that flight to Germany." Her gaze then swept across the audience, encompassing every sailor and soldier present. "It belongs to everyone who has ever raised their right hand and sworn to defend this country, knowing the cost." She took a slow breath, feeling the scars on her abdomen pull with the movement. "People often ask what a corpsman's weapon is. We are trained with rifles, yes, but that is not our primary tool." She shook her head slightly, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "Our weapon is hope. It's a roll of gauze. It's a tourniquet. It's the will to stand between a Marine and his fate, no matter the personal cost." The room was so quiet you could hear the rustle of fabric as people leaned forward, captivated. "We fight a different kind of battle. A battle against time, against shock, against the simple, brutal physics of a bullet or a blade. And we fight it with the belief that no one gets left behind." Her eyes found Miller again. "That day I was just doing my job. It's the job my brother, a Marine, inspired me to do. It's the job every corpsman on the line is prepared to do every single day. We are a thin line, a fragile barrier between a family getting a hero's welcome or a folded flag. And I am prouder to have held that line than of anything else in my life." She stepped back from the podium. "So I accept this medal not for what I did, but for what it represents. It represents the unbreakable bond between the Navy and the Marine Corps. It represents the promise that we will always take care of our own. Thank you." For a second, there was absolute silence. Then, as if a dam had broken, the applause erupted again, louder and more sustained than before. It was no longer just polite respect. It was a roaring, visceral affirmation. Marines and sailors were on their feet, their stoic expressions replaced by ones of raw admiration. Sergeant Davis gave her a sharp, proud nod. Lopez was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt, but the most powerful moment came after she stepped down from the stage. The formation broke, and a river of Marines in dress blues flowed toward her. They didn't just offer handshakes. They lined up, one by one, to shake her hand, to clap her on the shoulder, to look her in the eye and say, "Thank you, Doc." It was a receiving line of warriors, paying homage. An older gunnery sergeant, his chest a mosaic of ribbons from multiple wars, gripped her hand firmly. "I've served with a lot of docs," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You are the best of us." The words meant more than any citation. Later, as the crowd finally began to disperse, Miller made his way to her side. He didn't say anything. He simply stood beside her, a quiet, solid presence. He looked at the medal on her chest, then back up to her eyes, and offered one more, simple, perfect salute. Eva returned it, her heart full. The ceremony was over, the speeches were done, but the respect, forged in fire and sealed with blood, would last a lifetime. She was a corpsman, and she had come home. The formal reception was a blur of handshakes, salutes, and proud, smiling faces. Eva moved through the crowd, her mother never far from her side, both of them buoyed by the overwhelming wave of respect. But as the crowd began to thin and the echoes in the auditorium faded, a different kind of quiet settled around them. Sergeant Davis approached, his posture now more relaxed, the formality of the ceremony giving way to the familiar bond of the battlefield. "Doc," he said, his voice low. "The boys, we'd like a word. In private." He led Eva and her mother to a smaller, quieter room off the main hall. Inside, the entire squad was waiting, having changed out of their dress blues and back into the more familiar digital camis. The atmosphere was different here. It was heavier, more real. Lopez, Miller, and the others stood in a loose circle, their playful banter gone, replaced by a solemn gravity. Lopez stepped forward first. He held a simple, unadorned wooden box. "Doc," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "What we gave you out there," he nodded towards the auditorium, "that was from the generals. This is from us." He opened the box. Nestled inside on a bed of dark green felt was a Mameluke sword, the iconic officer's sword of the United States Marine Corps. Its blade was polished to a mirror finish, its hilt gleaming. But it was the blade itself that caught the light and Eva's breath. Etched into the steel in elegant flowing script was a single word: Doc. Eva's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes instantly filling with tears. This was not an issued medal. This was a sacred tradition, a profound and deeply personal honor bestowed by Marines upon one of their own. It was a recognition that transcended rank and service branch. "We had it made," Lopez continued, his own eyes shining. "Every one of us chipped in. Because that day, what you did..." He struggled for the words. The memory of finding her in that room, a bloody shield over Miller, clearly raw. "You didn't just do your job, Doc. You became one of us, forever." One by one, the Marines stepped forward. They didn't salute. They offered handshakes that turned into firm, back-slapping hugs. They shared quiet, personal words, memories of the patrol, jokes from before the ambush, the shared language of a team that had stared into the abyss together. Miller was last. He no longer needed his cane. He stood before her, a young man made old by war, but alive. "They told me what you did," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They told me how you just took it, for me." He looked down, gathering himself, then met her gaze, his own brimming with a debt that could never be repaid. "You gave me a future, Doc. You gave me my life. I will never, ever forget that. As long as I live, I've got your back." The raw gratitude in his voice was the final healing stitch in the wound of that day. The physical scars would remain, a permanent map of the cost. But this moment, this gift, these words from the men she would have died for, they healed something deeper. They healed the part of her that wondered if the pain had been worth it. The answer was standing right in front of her, alive and well. Her mother, Maria, watched from the side, weeping silent, happy tears. She finally understood. This wasn't just about her daughter's bravery. It was about this family her daughter had found, this bond that was as strong as steel and as lasting as memory. Ava carefully took the sword box, holding it as if it were made of glass. "Thank you," she said to the circle of grim, loving faces. This means more than you will ever know." She looked at each of them in turn, her corpsmen, her Marines. "I would do it all again. For any one of you." There were no more words needed. They had shared everything that mattered, the fear, the fight, the sacrifice, and now the unshakable loyalty that was their reward. The ceremony had been for the world to see. But this was for them, and it was everything.